Well, today we begin with one of the most important questions that we can ever ask ourselves on the spiritual journey. And that is, who is this path calling me to be? If we don't know the answer to that, if we aren't clear about where our spiritual journey is leading us, then it's incredibly easy to just drift through life trying to be everything to everyone, or worse. It's easy to look in the mirror one day and realize that we've become someone we never wanted to be. The world is a good ally in that cause, because the world is all too happy to distract us into losing sight of what's really true. And especially now, the world is all too happy to shrink our spirit rather than expand it. But we don't have to be so distracted. And we don't have to allow ourselves to just drift into the ego's thinking without realizing it. That is a choice that we're making. And as the Course constantly reminds us, we can make another choice. And so today I want to explore what it would mean to allow the teachings of A Course in Miracles to shape who you are becoming. And specifically, I want to talk about what kind of transformation we can expect from these teachings and how we can more fully step into them. As usual, there are a million different ways to approach this topic, but the quickest and most direct answer to the question of who is this path leading me to be is in the third volume of the course, the Manual for Teachers, in a section called What Are the Characteristics of God's Teachers? And this is a really important thing to note, because of all the characteristics of the spiritually advanced that Jesus could have chosen, here's where you'll find the 10 he actually did. It's one of the most important parts of the course, in my view, because if you look to that section, you will see the composite of the person this book is calling you to become. And we have a lot of resources here at the Circle about the manual's characteristics. But for right now, the idea isn't so much to focus on the individual characteristics themselves, but rather to step back and take in the bigger picture about what they reveal to us about the course as a whole. And when you do that, what happens is it becomes clear that Jesus is less interested in our heightened spiritual states, meaning our revelatory experiences or our epic meditations, and he's more interested in our heightened spiritual traits. If the course wanted to tie spiritual achievement to spiritual gifts, it could do that. And then we would have a course where the characteristics of God's teachers include things like how to have revelations and how to have next level meditations. But it doesn't. The manual says that the advanced teachers of God, meaning the people who have reached a higher level of understanding and maturity, quote, have the following characteristics. And then the course goes on to list qualities that amount to an inner transformation of the heart: trust, honesty, tolerance, gentleness, joy, defenselessness, generosity, patience, faithfulness, and open-mindedness. And I want to be really clear here that I am not trying to downplay meditation or spiritual gifts. It's because of Helen's spiritual gifts that we even have A Course in Miracles in the first place. But it is interesting to note that throughout the course and throughout Helen's notebooks, it's not her considerable gifts that Jesus praises. It's her right-mindedness, and specifically her love. As an example, in the back of the CE, there's a story where Helen really didn't like someone that she thought was a bad influence on Bill. And then one day, another friend comes to Helen complaining about the very person Helen has been struggling with herself. And we've all been in these situations, so we all know that the natural desire in those instances is to join in, piling on complaints about what a nightmare this person is and forming a little alliance against them. But Helen doesn't do that. Instead, she does the exact opposite. Helen sets her own bitterness aside and helps her friend get over his misperceptions and see the other person, who Helen doesn't like herself, in a better light. So here we have a case where Helen has made a choice to be gentle. She's made a choice to be tolerant and defenseless rather than a choice to be harsh and attacking. And Jesus not only calls that a miracle, but he also calls it an act of integrity. So, as you're thinking about this question of who is this path calling me to be, one answer is that the Course is asking you to be someone who genuinely believes that spiritual development and the development of character are, in fact, the same thing. Character is our internal compass that's always pointing us towards what's loving and what's true. It's what guides us to act with honesty and generosity and patience, even when those things are difficult or inconvenient. And the Course puts this idea of character development squarely in the center of its path. And I know not everyone is wild about this message. We tend to embark on the spiritual journey because we want to awaken from the illusion of the physical world. And here the Course may feel like it's dragging us down to something as mundane as character formation. A columnist that I follow, I think, put it really well when he said, quote, "Noble ideas are of little use if the people holding them don't know how to cooperate." So here we have the danger of not focusing on these things. What good are the highest reaches of this path if we can't get along? In Course Companions this month, we've hosted a challenge where we've asked everyone in the program to go out and actually do these kinds of things in the world, to give love in the world, to express miracles in the world, to love people, to cooperate, to be in harmony. And the stories that we've received are really, truly wonderful. A lot of helping people who are in need, a lot of really small acts of kindness. Shelley shared a story of taking the stems off of the cherry tomatoes for her partner, and he noticed and he was grateful for it. Marie left a note for her neighbor and with a gift. And this was a neighbor who she was having friction with. And so that was a big step for her. And I mentioned this in our miracles class, but I was quite moved when Robert said the other day that in the 32-year history of the circle, this challenge has been as close as we have ever come to the long held dream of inspiring Course students to go out in this world and love people as an expression of this path. And isn't that what you want a spiritual path to be? Something that actually gives us an inner transformation of the heart so that we become truly good people who have the power to heal what is broken through our love. It's true that in the Course, our goal is to awaken, but it's not true that we have to choose between good character and awakening. Again, in the Course, character formation is how we develop spiritually. Therefore, it's how we awaken. We see this near the beginning of the dictation where Helen took down that beautiful passage that Albin has in his song, Perfect Pure Light. That passage reads in part, "You are wholly lovely, a perfect shaft of pure light. Before your loveliness, the stars stand transfixed and bow to the power of your will." So gorgeous. Many of you are familiar with those lines, but you may not be as familiar with the ones that come afterwards, where Jesus says to Helen, note, this revelation was permitted because you did not project onto Bill the blame for your omission to ask me if you should transcribe the notes. That's a bit of an aside. This is what's most important. Jesus says, thanks for blessing him with a miracle instead of cursing him with projection. So here's a case where, because Helen's mind wasn't cluttered with blame and judgment towards Bill, she was able to receive that beautiful revelation about her true nature. So Helen did her part in setting aside her ego and choosing love instead, which left God free to work in her mind unencumbered. So here's a case where a spiritual gift that we would all love to have, a revelation from Jesus, is the direct result of simply blessing someone with love and forgiveness. This idea always reminds me of that Cory Booker quote where he says, before you speak to me about your religion, first show it to me and how you treat other people. Before you tell me how much you love your God, show me and how much you love all his children. Before you preach to me of your passion for your faith, tell me about it through your compassion for your neighbors. Because in the end, I'm not as interested in what you have to tell or sell as I am in how you choose to live and give. So that's the first thing. In who is this path calling you to be? And when it comes to the course, the answer looks a lot more like the person Booker is describing. And that, of course, leads us to the next question of how do we get there? Human transformation, you might have noticed, is not exactly an easy thing. And so this is the second thing I want to talk to you about. Who this path is calling us to be is incredibly important, but it's not enough. We have to actually become those people in order to live the promises of this path. And I'm so sorry to tell you that from a course perspective, the way you advance is by doing the work the course asks you to do. If you don't do the work, then you won't make any progress. And then you get to stand back and say, this doesn't work. The concept of doing work, though, has fallen out of fashion in contemporary spirituality. And sometimes it's even a little worse than that, because very often, rather than placing the value on doing the work, we'll place the value on not doing the work and call that spiritual. Very often, what we hear is that the thing to watch out for is doing the work, because that's pushing, that's striving. And those things, we're told, are the very opposite of what it is to be spiritual. It's a very clever thing that we've done in elevating our avoidance of the practice to a spiritual virtue. Very clever. And that's why so much of the mood and energy of spirituality these days is going towards not trying, because trying is striving, and not doing the lessons because that's too heady and too intellectual. And so the very detailed practice that the course offers us gets boiled down to the sense that the work, all we have to do is just to be. And I'll tell you, there is a place for being in the course. Lesson 109, my favorite of all the workbook lessons, is a great example. But here again, we're setting up another devil's bargain with ourselves. We're setting up a devil's bargain in the form of setting up another either or choice. I can do the practice, or I can just be at peace. When the course says the way you'll be at peace is by doing the practice. So just as spiritual traits lead to spiritual states, it's doing the practice that leads to being at peace. It's not an either or thing. It's one leads to the other. And so a question to honestly ask ourselves is, are we celebrating not doing the work as a way to avoid doing the work. One of the most quoted lines in the whole course is, "Forget this world, forget this course, and come with wholly empty hands unto your God." And as course students, I do think it's worth asking ourselves why we rally so enthusiastically around a quote that tells us to forget the very thing we're supposed to be studying. Forget this course isn't really asking us to forget this course anyway. It's a meditation instruction. It's a directive in how to clear our mind and come unto God in meditation. And yet, it's constantly cited as justification for why the course isn't asking us to do precisely what it's asking us to do, which is work. In the course, there is a real understanding that human transformation is a slow process. It's true. The course does say that we can wake up in an instant if we choose, but it doesn't work that way for most of us. Most of us have to go through the process in the course, the process the course is leading us through, whereby we train our minds through undoing the way we see now and then restoring our ability to see the holiness in all things. The introduction to the workbook says that its purpose is to train our mind in a systematic way to a different perception of everything in the world. A systematic way to train our minds to see everything differently in the world. And this occurs through a daily practice of good old-fashioned mental repetition, thousands and thousands of reps in your mind that over time do lead to a new way of seeing. I promise you. In the introduction to the workbook, the course says a theoretical foundation such as the text is necessary as background to make the exercises in the workbook meaningful. And here's the important line. Yet it's the exercises that will make the goal of the course possible. An untrained mind can accomplish nothing. It is the purpose of these exercises to train the mind to think along the lines the course sets forth. So we can't think that transforming something as complex as our mind and transforming something as complex as our character will happen unless we approach it with a very high level of seriousness and commitment. And whenever I think about this idea, I always think about Robert's son, Michael, who has as his goal to be a musician in a professional orchestra. Michael is 17 years old now, and he's played in a youth orchestra for a few years now. But to get to that level, he has had to practice every day. He has had to study with various teachers and so on. Robert was ill, some of you may remember, towards the beginning of the year, and we spent about 3 months in the States. And during that time, Michael was sending us videos, but we didn't have the same opportunity to be part of his daily routine and to be with him with his practices and his performances. And so when we returned to England last month, it was a real joy for both of us to see how far Michael had come through his work. His transitions were, he doesn't listen to this, but his transitions were a little rocky before, and those had smoothed out considerably. And I was telling him that the emotion we're meant to feel when we hear great classical music was really starting to emerge in the way that he was playing. So in other words, he's getting there, but he's getting there with a tremendous amount of effort. He is not sitting back and waiting for his musical gifts to come to him. He is doing the work and he is seeing the results. And that's because in the culture of music, the value is placed on the practice. Michael told me a few years ago that his goal was before any performance to have rehearsed so much that he could play the piece automatically. He says he wants each piece to be muscle memory. And in fact, one time he had a performance at the school. I know I've shared this story before, but I just love it so much. He had a performance at the school and he didn't notice until right before he was scheduled to play that he'd forgotten his sheet music. And so he had no choice but to just get out there and play from memory, which he did. And he says he made a mistake, but my report was that you couldn't tell. So, what if we placed this same value on practice in spiritual community? Our conversation here can be the same, that we are just going to do this practice until it becomes so automatic that whenever we get triggered, we're naturally going to respond with love instead of anger. It just muscle memory. It comes to us like that. It's that quick because it's that rehearsed. In the workbook, the course literally gives us instructions for how to practice a different lesson each day. But if you're not in the workbook, if you just want to try something different, I want to give you a practice that you can try that has been very helpful for me. In the same cameo in the back of the book that I was referencing earlier, cameo 8, where Jesus praises Helen for blessing Bill with a miracle instead of cursing him with projection, there's a whole series of other instances where Jesus not only doesn't blame Helen and Bill for their wrong-minded thinking, but he also doesn't blame them for the effects that result from their wrong-minded thinking. So that's remarkable if you really get into that. I won't go into the various stories. You can read the cameo. What matters the most is that Jesus is giving us some insight into his thinking here. And it all boils down to a really simple formula. Essentially, what he's saying to Helen and Bill is, don't worry about that thing you did. That's just what you do when you're in a state of wrong-minded thinking. Thankfully, there's another state of right-mindedness in which those errors no longer occur. Don't worry about that thing you did. That's just what you do when you're in a state of wrong-mindedness. Thankfully, there's another way of thinking where those errors no longer occur. What a remarkably kind and generous place to be. And Jesus had evidently practiced this so much that when it came to his own crucifixion, that's the very thought process he went to. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do, is nothing more than, don't worry about that thing you're doing. It's just what you do when you're in a state of wrong-mindedness. Thankfully, you can choose again. Amazing. So I was reminded of how healing this perspective is to be on the receiving end of. Just yesterday, when I was talking to an old friend of mine, we hadn't spoken in more than a year. And for some reason, it was on my mind to apologize to her for some impatient behavior that I had displayed with her a long time ago. But before I could even get it out, this apology that I'd been thinking about for an hour or so before our call, she said, don't give it another thought. She said, we have a relationship that is sturdy enough to take on some wind of human emotion and remain intact. Now, this is a friend who has done decades of her own practice, including practice with the Course, and I know that that is what allowed her to have such a generous and loving response. That's what we're going for. That's the kind of thinking that we're meant to have. That's how we get there. Don't worry about that thing you did. That's just what you do when you're in a state of wrong-minded thinking, but there's another way to think. Now, I'm not trying to excuse poor behavior. I feel like, just to level set here, it doesn't mean that you let people get away with all kinds of things that they shouldn't be getting away with. But what it means is that we have an opportunity to be like this. And that being like this, we can be big-hearted miracle workers in the world who are out there healing with our love. But again, the Course knows it's going to be, for most of us, a very slow going, a very slow process of learning these things in our mind, training our mind through the process of repetition. Now, when Robert and I aren't doing the workbook, we'll pick a line to practice and we'll write it on a post-it note. So many of you have seen these over the years. I've got one here on my computer now, and I wanted to show you. One of these days, I'm going to make an art project out of this, and so Robert keeps them all for me. And these are the post-it notes that Robert and I have been using each day this year. And so what we'll do is we'll write on the post-it note what the practice line is, and then we'll set an alarm on his phone, and we stop every 15 minutes and repeat the line slowly in our mind. If you're in the workbook, the CE app, which is free, offers workbook practice reminders, so you don't have to remember them or set an alarm yourself on your phone. It shows up through the app on your phone. And I promise you, we are better at all the things that this path is asking us to be. Better at trust, better at honesty, better at tolerance, better at gentleness when we do this work. And I will also say that we regularly notice the difference on days when we don't keep up with the practice versus days when we do. It's just pretty obvious. So I hope that that's been helpful in helping you see not only the focus that the course is asking us to place on doing the work, but some insight into some things that you can try if you don't want to kind of get in there with the discipline of the workbook. There are all kinds of different ways to approach this work, and you can find one that works for you. But as we close here, I do want to offer you a new challenge. And that challenge is, if you know the course is your path, go deep with it. Don't let the book or this community, for that matter, be something that you just pop into from time to time, looking for some quick hit of inspiration as you sample a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And also, as you're going deep, be mindful of the temptation to move on or quit the moment something becomes uncomfortable or asks too much of us. Sometimes right on the other side of that is where all those breakthroughs occur. There's an old saying that it's better to dig one well of 60 feet than to dig 6 wells of 10 feet each. And not everyone feels that way, and it's okay. But here at the Circle, we genuinely believe that real transformation comes from going deep into one path, even if it's not the course, and sticking with it. When you find something that truly rings that bell of truth in you, you don't need to keep searching. You really don't. You just can go deeper and let that path teach you. Let that path shape you. Let that path change you from the inside out. Robert and I have taken to calling the course the spiritual adventure of a lifetime. There is just an ocean of wisdom here, and every day is something new and something brilliant. So I'll leave you with a similar question to the one we began with. Do you want to become who this path is calling you to be? Not who the world says you should be, but who the voice of God himself is calling you to be. Because he is calling. He is calling. He's calling you to hold the characteristics of his teachers. He's calling you to bless with a miracle instead of curse with projection. He's calling you to place a value on undoing the way you see now and restoring your sight through exercises that make the goal of the course possible. And that kind of becoming, it does not come quickly. It doesn't come by being inspired on Sunday and going back and doing the same old thing on Monday. It comes through dedication. It comes through discipline. It comes through devotion. It comes through practice day after day, moment after moment, choice after choice. But if the course is your path, then let it be your teacher. Let it shape your character. Let it renew your mind and soften your heart until forgiveness does become so automatic that it is your first instinct, that you have that muscle memory that we talked about before. And when that happens, You won't have to ask what awakening looks like on this path. You will, in fact, be the answer. Thank you.